at lindegroup.com if you want to write and talk to us, but we'd love some help. On a related note, part of why we don't have the time to develop it is we're super slammed and we are hiring up a storm. And we specifically do not hire from our clients, and we don't poach from clients, which excludes a lot of the people in this room. But people, and we're not such a sucky place to work. We have a nice office. We're good to people. We have good benefits, good pay, all that kind of stuff. If you get tired or your friends are tired of solving one company's problems, they can come here and solve many, many, many companies' problems, and we will welcome them. We're looking for people who are really strong technically and just warm, good, nice people. So if you know them, please direct them to our ads. We currently have ads on Glassdoor and Craigslist. There are some going up in other places soon, but those are good places to find them. And then on my final note, I'm going to introduce Master Josh Senek, who's going to talk about a little tool that we wrote and we're going to be open sourcing. So there you go.
Hey, this is just really brief. We developed a tool, or I should say I developed a tool. We had this issue with Google Groups. Thank you. Cool. We have this issue with Google Groups in G Suite. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people use it, but there's this problem where if you make changes to Google Groups, there's no way to undo those changes. They're not stored anywhere. Google can't roll them back. So if you, through trial and error, accidentally delete a group, it is gone, and it's really hard to rebuild. So we wrote a tool that just basically goes in, retrieves the groups, the memberships, and the settings, and stores them in CSV. It's really simple. It's for paranoid administrators who don't want to implement GAM because it requests permissions to everything. It just selects the single API permissions it needs to do that task and downloads the groups, stores your OAuth credentials, really nice and tight. So we put it up on our GitHub. It's the organization name is Linde Group, and the tool is called GG Backup. Nice and simple. Give it a shot. It's alpha right now. If you see any issues with it, please let me know. I'm gonna make sure it keeps working, and we're gonna make it work. Cool.
All right. Thanks again for being here.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And I will forward out those links if you want to send them to me. I will make sure they get out on all of our Macbrained feeds so people can see those for you. All right. So tonight we're all here to see the lovely Ben Gross. He's going to talk about design principles for fleet management at UC Berkeley.
Hey, is this thing on?
We're going to share.
Let me adjust this one first. Good. Oop. Yeah. Is it not on? Is it recording? Awesome. Hey, my name is Ben Gross. I'm with UC Berkeley. In fact, I just checked. Have been at UC Berkeley 5 years as of next Thursday. Kind of odd. When I was working on this talk, it made me realize I'm actually kind of honored to be here. I was at the first Macbrained in the big yellow bus. Was anyone else in the big yellow bus? Cool. That was a while ago. And so I've been at UC Berkeley. Prior to UC Berkeley, I was at the Linde Group, our fine host this evening. And prior to that, I was a visiting scholar at Berkeley, wandering through the desert while finishing my PhD. And since I work at a university, I can't really give you facts and figures about VC funding or market capitalization. So I'll just give you a few other facts and figures. And sometimes when you work at a public university, the incentives can be a bit unique, such as the highly coveted and well located, I might add, parking space, as long as you get a Nobel Prize. And so just a super quick introduction about the team. We have one team member and one former team member here up front. And our biggest sort of product is the Berkeley desktop. And that Berkeley desktop we think of as an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is hardware, software, and services. So in terms of software, we have default images, Macs and Windows. We also have effectively an internal app store with self-service, which I'll talk about. And we have a hardware standard that's now a UC hardware standard. And we have a set of services. This includes patch management, security, and a few other things. I'll go into details. And these services and features can be, you can either get the whole kit and caboodle, or you can mix and match them. A few numbers, just in case it's interesting for whatever reason. We manage about 15,000 devices total, about 12,000 Windows, 3,000 Mac. Of those, we've done, you have to understand the degree to which Berkeley has been decentralized, distributed, and people like to do their own thing. And the fact that we can now say 9 of those 15,000 images are standard images produced from the group, I'm kind of proud of. About 11,000 overall have self-service. And those self-service, and this is undercounted, which I'll talk about, they've been used about 43,000 times, which we think saves a good bit of labor. One thing that is interesting to me is the 3.8 is the number of offers accepted per machine, and that's Windows, and 4.5 is the Mac. And that is, the Mac number is higher, and that's kind of interesting. The Windows one uses BigFix, and the Mac one uses Casper, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So if we think about components of fleet management, there's roughly 4 major components. We have machine provisioning, configuration and package management, directory services, and remote access. And I think if we're talking about where we're going, it's really important to know where we've been. So in the beginning, there was the command line. And I don't need to read all these, but it's really, I spent some time doing some research for the talk, and it was kind of fun. And it makes you realize how old some of this is. Bourne Shell, 1977, what we think of as kind of the beginnings of modern remote access, Telnet 69, RLog in 83. These weren't replaced till SSH version 1 in 95. We think about directory services, Sun, Yellow Pages, and NAS, mid-80s, X500, which we'll get to LDAP, late 80s, some jumpstart the kind of original bare metal provisioning. We don't get to kind of newer remote access with remote desktop and BNC till 94. And I think as it happens with most things that change the world, and blaze a trail for awesomeness, it really, you need a reason for that change. And this drove a postdoctoral student at the time, an assistant by the name of Mark Burgess, to create CF Engine. And I think, I don't know how many of you have heard of CF Engine. It's really what I think of as the kind of modern configuration management, which he defined and laid out the intellectual foundations in the mid-90s. And if you read the work, you think, wow, this guy was really kind of ahead of his time, and it's worth reading. And in many ways, this was an early iteration of self-healing systems. Now, Mark Burgess is a very wise man. However, he is not a very concise man. So if you make it through the 472 very dense pages of In Search of Certainty, you can move on to the 194 pages of addendum in Thinking and Promises. But otherwise, you can go look up the Google videos and YouTube for other ones. But what is interesting is I really think, and he's worth looking at, that I think of him as forming the basis of modern approaches to configuration management, where you essentially say, I want a desired state, and instruct the tool to make it so. So all of these tools pave the way to a more modern infrastructure. And I'll just burn through some of these really quickly. Again, we have LDAP in 93, Active Directory in 99. And so these are the directory services. We get what we think of as a modern SSH2 in 2006, PowerShell remoting 2009. We're getting pretty close to the modern era, but some of the stuff is old. CF Engine 93, SCCM not much later in 94. Then we have Puppet, BigFix, Chef, SaltStack, and Ansible, all spanning the next almost decade. And if we think about moving to the Mac tools in that era, we have NetBoot and Server 1.0. This is sort of the proto OS 10 in 99. That's back when it was $499 for a 10 client edition. I don't know if anyone remembers that. $999 bargain for unlimited clients. And so we have OS 10 Server, the first iteration, 2001. And then in 10.2, in 2002, this is where we get Open Directory and Workgroup Manager. And this kind of forms the modern configuration management, what we think of as OS 10. And then we get Apple Remote Desktop. And then we get server admin tools, kind of the GUI point and click in 2003. Then moving forward again, Jamf comes along in 2002, soon after Deploy Studio. Then InstaDMG 2007, AutoGMG replacing it around 2013, Monkey 2009, Autopackager, which just brought up. And then if we really think kind of, and I'll talk about this more later, Profile Manager comes along in 10.7. And now also in 10.7, it's a $50 effectively activator application from the App Store. This was big news as well. And so what I really wanted to come to the talk is sort of patterns and principles we use and how we go from here to there. Let's talk in a little ways about the future. And I don't think we're brave enough or smart enough to predict everything, but I do hope we can share some patterns that were useful. And these patterns will hopefully lead you in some directions that may be beneficial. I do have to say, with one caveat or disclaimer, Berkeley's a bit of an odd duck, so what works for us may or may not work for you. Those who have worked for Berkeley will know this well. Oh yes, another colleague. So where do we go? So if we think about where does the future belong to, the future is really, it's big and fast. And what are things that are both big and fast, and what do we mean by that? So if we think about big, right? These are the tools and the platforms like BigFix and Active Directory that have helped, and Jamf, that have helped many institutions achieve a pretty great scale. And it's all about a lot of endpoints. I'll talk about later, billions of burgers served. And for example, in a lot of endpoints, right, IBM dogfooding their own product, I think is about 700,000 endpoints. The Veterans Administration, again, these are BigFix numbers, 400,000. Intel, I think maybe somebody will confirm or deny, around 250,000. But big's not big enough or good enough in the new world, because you also really need to be fast. And the reason I would argue you need to be fast is because things today are different than yesterday. And how are they different? You may all remember the wonderful time back when OS 10 was released roughly every 18 months, and you would roughly deploy every other one, and times were good. Now Apple releases every year, and you probably want everyone. Adobe, again, used to be roughly every 18 months. You could do every other one, and it was cool. Nobody would probably even notice. And then Windows was roughly every 3 years, and this was not enough time, and you might not do everyone there either, and this was enough time to leisurely upgrade, prepare for OS ones, machine hardware refresh cycles. But the world's a lot different now, and with Windows 10, there are 2 releases a year, and they've been changing it every other month, so who knows? So welcome to the new normal. And so if we think about the principles to deal with this new normal, almost all the machines in our environment, or we have multiple environments, all have multiple stakeholders. We have departmental IT or local IT, shared services IT. This is essentially a central desktop support organization. And most importantly, we have the end user. And so what have we done to kind of improve this? One of the things we've done that's really improved things a lot is improve communication. And for the most part, we've done a good job of managing the communication around our endpoint changes to make sure that changes the team is making are kind of streamed out to the audience, and in a roughly transparent manner, so people know what changes have made. We can definitely do a better job. And we make sure these changes are archived along with they're published. And recently we did an additional communication channel that I think was really beneficial. We do this monthly, what we call Berkeley Desktop Release Notes, where we send out, these are primarily for our images and other major changes, and we send out a note, hey, this is what's coming. And we do it just a 30-minute call, it's often less, where we just announce the changes and do Q&A, and it's made a big difference. Additional, we also have done building some tooling and reporting. So Clifton and our team built this tool called Baseline by Computer. And I don't know how many people use BigFix, but in BigFix, there are these baselines. And baselines are essentially a collection of rolled up actions that apply to a machine if they are they're called relevant. So if they apply to that machine. And so you can pick a machine and you can pick a baseline, and this tool will say, well, what is actually relevant for this machine? And this is just one example that was really nice for our set of stakeholders that can go look in and say, well, what is this thing going to do to this particular machine? And do I have to pay attention? And so following all that, another general principle is iteration. And iteration is critical in an environment because the environment is complex enough where we have a lot of non-obvious dependencies and we can never make a complete map in advance. And also, as the people who've worked in Berkeley, but if you're not, it's really a consensus-based culture. There is a joke that's not a joke. There are many of these, that 49-1 is a tie. And so when you have that combined, and I thought that was odd in the beginning, but it's actually not funny anymore. And so combine that with a large bureaucracy, and it means if you do a lot of big, large advanced planning, it means, and you attempt to roll out a project in a big bang, there's a good chance by the time you're done the planning for the big bang, the world has changed and that big bang may no longer make sense. And so it is, there's this other joke, not a joke, that when somebody says, hey, you know, it will be done this month, say August, someone will say, which year? And again, it's not funny, but you know, with this constant iteration strategy of release early, release often, it doesn't mean that we don't plan and this is somehow a shortcut, but it's rather critical in the environment. And with you have, again, a potential large number of unknown dependencies that you are able to iterate quickly. And increasingly going back to the new normal, we find that vendors are a forcing function. We often say, follow the vendor's lead. That could effectively be a principle in itself. And so going back, the rate of change is increasing. So this constant iteration is a more effective way to keep up. One example here is we had a tool that Riff here wrote in the very early that we thought was going to be awesome. It was called Software Deploy. This was back in the era when we thought command line interfaces were really awesome. We've come a long way. And at the time, we thought it was going to be this great addition for the tool staff. And so what it would happen is you image a machine, this is Windows, the tech could come along and very quickly just say, I want this machine to have all the following software by tagging. They could then leave. BigFix would sweep through later at some point and install the software. And it actually was an improvement. But then we rolled out BigFix offers at the time and Casper self-service, and almost instantaneously nobody cared, because we thought these tools were going to be for end users, and it turns out the techs really liked them. In fact, techs would often do them on behalf of the end user, but it was Software Deploy that caused us to kind of have the initial thoughts and rethink. I don't even know if we would have done self-service if we hadn't had Software Deploy. So in a way, you could say this is fail fast, but it was really pretty beneficial. And that kind of leads us to prioritizing the customer experience as a pattern. And this, so the customer experience has always been a part of the normal of business of endpoint operations, right? Because your customers are your customers. But if it's not obvious, and it will be by the end of this talk, we really try and take our cues from the cool kids who do things at web scale, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Netflix. And I think that there's a lot for us to learn in endpoint operations from the web scale operations. It doesn't all apply, but increasingly the more we find that we can, it's really been beneficial. And one of those things is working pretty hard to implement the idea that endpoints, we should not treat them like pets. And what do I mean by pets? Well, pets, people love their pets. They make names for their pets. When their pets get sick, they take them to the doctor. However, from a management overhead, and this is all normal for server administration, we would rather treat our endpoints like cattle. Why? Because cattle are easier. You don't name them. Cattle have numbers or IDs. When cattle gets sick, we have dinner. And, and again, while this concept makes more sense in the world of distributed server computing, distributed endpoint computing is more complicated. And why is it more complicated? Because every endpoint comes with a user. And to that user, their machine is a pet. And hell, they even have images of their pets as wallpaper on their desktop. And that wallpaper is important if you're migrating the machine, because they may be pissed, and you've probably all dealt with that before. See, not. And the point is that customer and user experience matters in the world of endpoint management more, in a way, differently at least, than server administration. And the experience, I would argue, is dictated more by the Dropboxes of the world. This is the world where software and cloud storage is all, you have a simple file and it goes into a magic folder and it just syncs. And that hardware and software experience is really heavily influenced by a small fruit company in Cupertino that makes dongles for laptops, of which I have a lot right there. And so in the days, I think the days where IT could make tools, say they have an enterprise dashboard field, chuck them over the wall to the users without really caring how they feel about it, are coming to an end. That said, any of you, my brethren, who work in a large organization may also notice that it is maybe difficult to get things done if you're also simultaneously dealing with border skirmishes. And so one of the principles we have that's really worked well, and I would say this is one of our more important ones, is offering control at the edges. And how do we do that? And one of the biggest ways we do that is we have self-service, and just some examples of self-service. So if you have our default image, for example, we always put on the latest version of Office for every platform. But if you had for whatever reason, and a lot of these, you enroll a machine into our service, we then have Office into self-service. If say you're on Windows, you want a developer tool, you have Notepad++, we have a whole arrangement. In a number of cases, if you want to enable endpoint backup software, that's in self-service. And we've been beta testing this 30-minute admin that lots of people have tried. But one of the things that's really been important that I don't think we appreciated till later was building self-service tools for IT. And that really was a big deal. So if any of you also do some Windows stuff and had to deal with the Intel AMT vulnerability, we now have a self-service action that can run Dell Command Update and update your firmware on the box, which is really a nice benefit. We had Citrix on many of the machines, but UC is a really large entity. And there are enough people that use Citrix in other organizations where we ended up building for IT staff an opt-out mechanism so that our Citrix configuration won't clobber a configuration that somebody might have to deal with another UC. We also, on the Mac side, Alex on our team built a machine tagging one, so we have additional effectively asset information about division and department in that. And we also found that in some cases the AV could limit installing software. So for text, we have a 30-minute opt-out for AV. Another really good example that Riff here wrote of offering control of the edges is this tool called Post Deploy. It's a little hard to see, but after you've imaged a machine, and Alex has written a Mac version as well, after you've imaged a machine, the tech can make a non-trivial number of changes. There's a small number of options, but effectively you put in a username, you look up it automatically, the user gets looked up, their division department gets pulled out, you can enter the building name because there's no way to get that programmatically in our environment, choose on whether or not you want a secure or restricted configuration. It does a bunch of checking, but then it also lets the tech opt in and out of patching, opt in and out of QA, and these have all been really beneficial. And so I talked about some of these numbers. We've had about 13,000 offers with Casper accepted, 30,000 with BigFix. And I would say this is a pretty big win for us. And it's been a pretty good saving in labor. And self-service has really been a major change for us. Oh, hey. And so another pattern, a lot of time we spend now is on security. Effectively, we are now the endpoint security team. We have a security team, but in order to do endpoint security, you have to have managed endpoints. Prior to our team forming about 5 years ago, there was really only a tiny amount, roughly an order of magnitude smaller number of managed endpoints on campus. And now we've effectively become the endpoint security team. And so what do I mean by north-south security? I mean, so north-south is managing the stack, defense and depth, and by east-west, I mean managing the life cycle of the endpoint, essentially architecture versus process. And because Peter asked, when we talk about security, I like to enlist the help of my favorite information security thought leader and patron saint of security, InfoSec Taylor Swift. If you are not following Swift on security on Twitter, I would argue you are making poor life choices. I am not kidding, do it now. I'll wait. Not really, but so one thing about the public nature of the university is really important to campus leadership, but the public nature of the university is also extremely attractive to our attackers. The scene above is what we at Berkeley normally refer to as a greenfield deployment. And part of the reason that I make this joke about that is if somebody says, does Berkeley have X? And I usually say, solving for X, the answer is yes. We have some of everything. You might say, hey, that computer is old. You need to replace it. And they'll say, well, that computer is hooked to this $10,000 spectrometer, and that company is out of business and don't touch it. Also, you might be amused to know that all of our machines have public IPs, even the printers. Think about that, or don't. But there are, don't do that at home, kids. There are many internal IT groups, and every group and possibly every person in that group can do their own thing. And the work we've done essentially to do is to try and converge that variance down to something manageable. For example, when I arrived on campus, remote desktop, this is the first thing I lectured Riff on, remote desktop was open to the world. And remember, every machine has a public IP. And it was open to the world, and oh, there's a shared admin password. And we fixed all of that, but we've done a lot of work for standardizing security. And so, on the other hand, at Berkeley, and in particular, the students are not always the victim. And so that is another, the dorm networks are a fascinating place. And speaking of public IPs and printers, I had to have a large meeting after somebody found a copy of War and Peace that printed on one of the printers in the administrative office. The friends don't let friends put laser printers on the internet. And I was kind of reflecting and working on this talk of where we spent time in the last month security-wise. On the left here, we have Windows, and we've had the Shadows Brokers dump, the Intel AMT, the Connexent, which you would think is the HP audio driver vulnerability, WannaCry, which is mostly related to Shadow Brokers, and then like the now seemingly daily variants of the various SMB exploits. And on the Mac, we did have the Trojan version of Handbrake. And so these are not always that commensurate, but it's been really sharply distinguished in the last month or so. And so then when we think, and Peter, here's another one, about North-South security, I think one of the areas that's most interesting is this hardware-enabled security on the endpoint. I'm really hopeful in that 1013, Apple is gonna make more use of the secure enclave, part of the Touch ID. I have no idea. I guess we'll know in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And I hope they potentially port over some of the secure boot processes from iOS, which have really been impressive for a long time. And maybe we'll see how the new file system factors into that. But I think right now, honestly, one of the more interesting places to look at hardware-enabled security is Windows 10 and the Intel in particular, all the security features. And this is really, Windows 10 is where security and hardware become BFFs. And we have things like Secure Boot, Device Guard, Credential Guard, Application Guard, all these other guards. And one of the big underlying components is UEFI or EFI in Mac parlance, the modern BIOS replacement. And this, in working in concert with some extensions that allow you to do some hardware-assisted cryptographic checks, make things like Secure Boot possible, where you can have some assurance that your boot record has not been tampered with. App Locker is essentially, Device Guard is essentially App Locker or application whitelisting for kernel extensions. We've seen some things like SIP on the Mac, but I really think Windows 10 is ahead here, and I'm hoping 1013 has this. Emmet was pretty useful. Its life has come to an end, and most of that is getting rolled natively into Windows 10. And I think in a lot of ways, the sort of Sisyphusian struggle of security is this working with the usability and the manageability and these design principles to kind of work in the challenging environment, and which brings us to East-West security. And if we think about what's the current trend, it's protect, detect, so your visibility on your network, respond, kind of your centralized remediation. And the industry trend is really enterprise detection response, EDR, which gives you a lot more data and way more resolution. This is totally awesome, assuming you can hire people to analyze the data or buy or build systems to analyze the data and have budgets to do so. However, if you've read the news lately, Berkeley budgets and UC in general only go in one direction. And so we really need to front load protection. And historically, our approach to security remediation was a bit less systematic than was ideal. And so we try and move into security as a service as, again, front loading this protection and offering security as a service where we layer on kind of patching, configuration management, exploit mitigation, and compliance all together has really been a big advantage. This includes AV protection. And we've had a good amount of success offering this. And it's really built on this multi-vendor toolkit. The base layer is BigFix and Casper Jamf Pro, but we have a whole array of tools. And one of the things in terms of following the vendor's lead, we patch from multiple sources. In particular, we're trying to get the patches from the vendors directly. We do have content through BigFix and some through Casper, but if we can get it from the vendor, we try and push it out from the vendor as quickly as possible. So you have Microsoft updates, Chrome and Flash, and on good days, Firefox are all updated directly as soon as they're available. BigFix in a lot of cases, which is really currently our primary patching mechanism, is a secondary mechanism for all these to deliver the patches. We try and get them from the vendors first, and then in some cases control the reboots with BigFix. And in terms of just patching, as soon as the patches come out, in the last 2 to 3 years, I'd say we've rolled back 1 or 2 patches. The only one I can think of in the last year or so, Windows side, there was a not awesome Microsoft Office update that was causing Excel and Word to hang. And our patch cycles for the Mac follow Apple's release cycle, which I think is related to Siri flipping a coin. On the Windows side, we're just doing the standard Patch Tuesday, although there's now also the C week. And then when we do our imaging, we also rerun updates like I imagine a lot of you do. So at least when you image, you're always getting the latest updates, no matter when your image was. So if we think about where we go, we spend a lot of time, if we're front-loading protection, on setting secure defaults. And one of the things, since we manage this ecosystem, it's easier for us to start early in the chain. And on managed macOS devices, we use both the BigFix and Casper agents. We use different pieces. We load SCEP for AV. I hope to eventually get rid of this. We're also currently joining our macOS devices to the domain. And I really hope to get away from this and switching to Nomad. On the Windows side, we install BigFix, Windows Defender, and Emmet with all the options. We're going to be replacing these with Windows 10 features. These are also joined to Active Directory. And we've done a good bit of work to limit local administrator. All the machines have firewalls, and we're now started working with application whitelisting on the Windows side. And I've been taking a look at Santa on the Mac, which think is pretty fascinating. Another big deal was minimizing the bloat. So in the beginning, we used to have these really large images with every app under the sun, and that was a bad idea, and eventually you learn. And now all our images, we push most of the software to self-service, and they're all plug-in free except for Flash bundled with Chrome and IDE. In the bad old days, we had Flash, we had Silverlight, we had Java, and we had Shockwave. Avoid this whenever is possible. One of the areas that I think is really, if you haven't been following it, is totally worth following, is these kind of trusted endpoints and zero trust networks. And one significant advantage where these have come from is once you have fine-grained information about your endpoints, i.e. you have a configuration management inventory systems, you can start to make trust decisions related to your knowledge about the state of the device rather than the location of the network, aka a way nicer version of NAC. And I think that this then gives you Arbuckle's law, where you say the actual compliance of an organization is direct proportion to the degree to which its policies are expressed as code, i.e. configuration management as code. And we try and have the automation do the heavy lifting so that policies are executed consistently and they don't require a human. I think that Google has really led the way. I like their Beyond Corp one, their 6-year mission to have every Google employee work successfully from untrusted networks without the use of a VPN. And what they've done is they've moved away, this is now in production, right? They've moved away from a traditional VPN, and they dynamically assign privilege based on things like device state. So is it up to patch? What is it doing? Where is it? And what is the person's job function? You can do much more fine-grained and roughly real-time decision. It's a big deal, and they've published widely. I recommend it. You can watch a lot of videos. They have a lot of talks. They've published articles in Usenix logins. And I think this has effectively spawned an entire industry. I think, for example, Duo Beyond is a nice example of implementing Beyond Corp in a relatively user-friendly package. And I feel reasonably confident this is where the industry is going from what I can see. It's worth paying attention to. And that kind of brings us to an obvious effect of treating endpoint management of code, thinking of scale as the mother of automation. the code makes it easy to automate repeatable tasks. And so automation is no longer something you do because it's cool, and it is cool, but it's now necessarily due to the scale and the complexity. So here's another, I like quotes, but here's one from the SRE book. If we have to have a staff of humans to do work, we are feeding the machines with blood, sweat, and tears of human beings. Think the Matrix with less special effects and more pissed off system administrators. This is your week, right? And so a nice example of this automation in our team is another former team member, James Stewart, who's now at IBM. And he did some nice work of patching components for Firefox and iTunes, where with a single click, the operator was able to send out patches and have it both deploy applications and update applications when they're not running. This then saves a lot of point. You don't need to do reboots if you can do patching of application simply because you can recognize it's not running and nab it at that point. And really, I think this endpoint management of code is something that we can't underemphasize. And again, shamelessly borrowing from the web scale approaches and gravitating towards tools that help us manage endpoint platforms and infrastructure as code. And so some examples of this, like what is kind of in terms of the cool kids, what is the newer infrastructure of code? Terraform is really nifty if you haven't taken a look. This is from HashiCorp. And this is pretty nascent in the world of endpoint management. It's a lot more mature in the server space. But then we have configuration as code, and this is really Chef and Puppet. And I have to say, the thing that makes me the most sad about BigFix and Casper is they're really not configuration as code. They're really databases with a GUI, and they let you do awesome things, but version controlling well and driving a version control system is not one of those. And another area that's pretty fascinating is kind of this immutable infrastructure with Packer. Whether or not this is viable on the endpoint for a solution that's not like deep freeze, I don't know, but it's interesting to think about. And if we apply these principles of software development to endpoint management, again, we can do rollback, roll forward. You get the advantages of change history. These are all things that are hard to do otherwise. So Rift does a lot of the patching, or in fact, almost all the patching for Berkeley. And what would probably, I think, make his job more awesome is if he could define a formal policy in code in a markup language and check it out of source control to determine what patches went and which patches went before. And this, I think, for us would have a pretty big advantage away from the GUI abstraction. The text extraction would be much better. And so again, we always come back to this idea of automation. It's pretty core to everything we do. One example I'll plug, speaking of auto packagers, so another member of our team, former member of our team, Kim Scopetta, wrote what I think was a nice project called Puppet JSS. So it's a set of Puppet modules that can build up and configure your JSS. It can handle the JSS, the MySQL distribution points, dev and prod. And if you have Puppet and you have Casper, check it out. And if you want to take over the project, I can give you some notes because I don't think Tim has time to work on it anymore. And I think it was it also supports Vagrant. I really like the ability to be able to say, hey, I want to try out this new version of Jamf Pro, and I can just build it up in a Vagrant on a VM on my machine, try something out and throw it away. And I just spent 5 minutes, and that's pretty awesome. I totally like this quote from Elliot Jordan, formerly of the Linde Group. Oddly enough, so it's in his auto update management document, but he put the quote in a graphic. And I cannot find a single instance anywhere online of anyone quoting this if you quote the string in Google, but it's a good one. And so measurement, sort of getting towards the end, like one area that I would love to talk to somebody offline about is, I feel like we've kind of gotten stuck at billion serves. So what do I mean by that? So in the beginning, we gathered all these metrics. We can tell you how many machines we have, which are Macs, which are PCs, how many have self-service, which exact number of applications that have, how many people have installed Photoshop. But the raw counts are great, but how do we measure? And this is a question I'd really be interested for the audience. How do we capture an increase in value? And by that, I mean, so we have a lot of variance in our environment. Say early on, we persuade a department like, look, you can lower your costs if you just do inventory. So they just do inventory. And then they say, okay, I'm not really gonna be out of a job if I'm not clicking this button, so you can patch for us. So then we're now patching, we've added value. And then say, for example, they say, well, we'll let our users install software because I didn't really need that to keep my job either. And so we will then add self-service. Then at some point they decide to rebase the machine on a standard image. This again lowers the total cost of ownership, increases the ROI if I want to put an MBA hat on. And then finally, maybe they pick standard hardware, and all of a sudden now you have a turnkey solution. And so while we're super awesome at grabbing the stats for billions served, we're not super awesome at figuring out how to capture this value as it moves up the chain. And we improve our campus, and capturing that value and be able to communicate that value up is really valuable if you're, say, competing for resources. And so our final pattern that I think is sort of really familiar if you are doing MDM is the desktop as device. Because I think in a lot of ways, MDM has led the way. Like, why has it led the way for management? Well, there's no more system management by remote desktop. You don't have system agents. You have MDM agents. Essentially, you have management by API. And this is all the trendy trends of DevOps and SRE. And we have cattle and toasters and ideally immutability on the endpoints. And one of the things that I think we require signed binaries. You're no longer picking and choosing patches. You're just updating the system. And one of the areas that I think is super interesting, if we roll all the way back to what's this change in history of the evolution of all these tools, is this split. In the beginning, we have this configuration management and directory servers merge. So when you have Active Directory, you have your directory information in GPOs. If you have Open Directory, you have Workgroup Manager, MCX. And now once we move to the world of configuration profiles, though, in MDM, you have the split between directory servers and configuration management. And I think that allows a lot of new and interesting things, and that seems where things are going. And so really quickly, I think frequently we talk about Casper here, which we use and we really like, but we do a lot with BigFix. And BigFix, I have to say, has traditionally, I know there's some people in the audience who use it, has not been super awesome on the Macs. It's just not their big market. But when you're a company the size of a Sun, Mac stuff is maybe not that big of a deal, but they've really improved lately. And so, for example, if you haven't seen it, this is their new BigFix offers. And it's really dramatically improved. It looks reasonable now. It did not so much before. They also have a bit more information so the end users can see what's wrong. It eliminates a lot of questions. Another big deal is IBM this year added support for profiles. So in the back end, this is really just using the profiles command. It's not using APNS. And on the Windows side, it's using the MDM Bridge WMI provider, very similar, but this allows you to do feature restrictions, password requirements, and it now means you can do reasonable profile management with BigFix. You don't, of course, need this on the Mac if you have Casper, but you have options now. And so kind of just to summarize, we had this set of patterns, and I had this set of principles, and sort of bringing these together really kind of forms the basis for how we think about endpoint management on campus. And like everyone else, and I want to say thank you, and like everyone else, we are hiring, and please come talk to me, but I will take questions. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the crowd?
Was there a question there?
Yeah, there is a question. So what was the communication that you got people to use self-service? What was the carrot to motivate them to do that and reboot, right? Because some of these times you have to reboot, especially Windows.
Do you mean that is for techs to allow self-service, or is
well,
for end
you have
users
techs
to
and you
use
have
it?
customers, right? And so if you give them both, right, you have the tools available. What is it that you dangled for customers? Well, ease of use, but if they don't even know it's there, how did you get them to know it was there?
So in two different ways, I would say our bigger problem was, the thing I often say on campus is, when we're often brought in by some leadership for a department of, hey, we want to do this new thing. And it usually doesn't go well. I often say that when we go to visit a department, we might as well wear Grim Reaper outfits. Everyone's like, get out of my office. I'm not going to have a job anymore as soon as you guys roll in. And it takes a long time for us to explain, like, hey, we don't want to take your job. We just want to make your life suck less. And But for techs, this was actually a big deal. I remember talking to a tech who's pretty knowledgeable and thoughtful. And I remember him saying two things. He said, well, if I'm not joining machines to Active Directory anymore, and I'm not installing Photoshop, how am I gonna keep up my skills? And I was like, oh dude, like, this is your salvation, right? But I mean, people, I don't know about your environments, but people in our environments are kind of afraid for their future, and they see this automation as a thing that is coming. It is the self-driving cars for truckers, right? It is. And so that is the work, at least for us, that was the hardest. For the end users, I think the biggest one was, frontline support staff is, at least in our environment, largely motivated by customer satisfaction ratings. And so if the customer is like, hey, I want you to install all of Creative Cloud, I know it might take you all afternoon, but cool. And so it just took a while for this sort of normalized sense of, hey, you can just click here and get a coffee. To give you a sense, when I arrived on campus, say you wanted Visio, you would send in a ticket. It would go to your local IT person. Your local IT person would put in a ticket with the software licensing person. The software licensing person would respond with a key and a download location. And then, in some cases you could use a KMS, but there are other apps where this happened. And a day, a week, or a month later, you would get your software. Now you click on whichever button for your platform, it pops up a menu, you get it, and maybe you get coffee and the software is there. And I think some combination of word of mouth, it being normalized, techs and local IT being much more comfortable with it not going to replace them. It took a couple of years, but it's mostly the norm. And we still have cases where people, maybe techs don't know the offers are there, and there maybe could be better communication, but it was really mostly just time and offering a good service that, at least in my experience, I don't know if other people at Berkeley have had a different experience, but that was really what, at least for us, I think made a difference.
Do you have it in the onboarding process?
I don't know. I don't onboard employees. Anyone know? I don't know. I'd have to ask. Theoretically, yes.
Hey there. What value and benefits do you still find with imaging? Is that something that you're intending to continue doing?
No.
Versus enrolling and managing a retail OS?
So on Mac OS, on Windows, yes, there are other complications, but on Mac OS, I hope we can get rid of it. We argue our default now, you should do, the one big advantage, and Facebook has done the nicest example of this before, is simply speed. It's really fast to bare metal machines, but it's not so bad anymore. And with the 10.12.4 update, there's now new restore options. I don't know how much that matters in our environment. My expectation is 10.13, you're not going to be able to bare metal a fully baked image anyway, and it'll be like iOS. If you're in a bare metal, you're going to do some, at least on newer hardware, something cryptographically signed. But in short, I would like to, it's mostly a time and a communication problem, but our default is already thin imaging. We're not there yet in terms of using DEP and pushing it all out, but I'm hoping by the end of the year we will be. So in short, no, we don't intend to keep imaging unless there was some edge case for some reason. But my guess is with 10.13, from everything that it's, the rumor mill, it's going to be a lot harder, if at all.
So, excuse me, you had a slide about measure all the things and needing the right metrics for the right time. Can you give us some examples of what you mean by the right metrics at the right time, or what kind of metrics you're looking for?
Well, in the beginning of the big and fast, as we were ramping up, if you start out and say in all of campus, there were 1,500 machines when we started. And as soon as you get to 3,000 and the billions of burgers served, you're like, hey, we're awesome. We doubled already. And so in the beginning, just adding these raw counts was really the right thing. It kind of helped us along. It made us say hey, the amount of money you're dumping into this team, and sort of, there wasn't a team prior to us that focused on engineering. It was, while you were firefighting, in your spare time, you did the engineering, and everyone knows how that goes. And it's a lot harder to build up systems. So when I say right metrics at the right time, in the beginning, the raw counts were a big deal. But I think as we kind of increasingly hit more and more of the majority of campus, sort of the low hanging fruit, what we've added is value to existing customers, much greater than new customers. And we have not been that great in capturing that value to existing customers. And that's an area I'm super interested in. And at least with our current tooling, I don't see a great way to capture that information because in many ways, BigFix and Casper are both point-in-time snapshots of system state. They're not data warehouses. And so we would have to then fork that off to another system, figure out analysis for it, archive that, and we're not there yet. Or you have a user and a computer, and that user, for example, their machine first got inventory, and then if they called a tech, you don't have to play 20 questions. Well, which version of Office do you have? Well, which version of Windows do you have? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Or which versions of Mac OS? Nobody knows what version of Mac OS they're on. And so when you have inventory, right, your costs for support go way down. So that's your first step. But then when we say, for example, add patching, then you're driving your cost down first. You're totally reducing your risk across the fleet. And then again, when you add self-service, then you're really reducing your labor. And each of these is a step up, but our machine count might not change, but the value to I guess what I'm trying to say, the value to the institution is really increasing, and we're not awesome at capturing that value in a way we can communicate it. And if any of you are doing that, I'm super interested.
Question from the stream. Eric from Pinterest wants to know, are there any concerns about updating from vendor directly given the recent issues? Example is Handbrake.
Sure. At least in our environment, I think the chances that and we're only doing this from the biggest vendors right now, we're not doing any smaller vendors. So all of the stuff is code signed, which Handbrake was not. And so I think there's definitely a concern, but like if we really got to be worried about Apple's patches and Microsoft's patches, like we got other problems. But that said, both of those have had problems, but the percentage of problems that we've had from bad vendor patches compared to the percentage of problems we had from not patching or patching late, they're not comparable. So I'll take any time a occasional mea culpa and a rollback, assuming, it doesn't knock your neck offline, which has happened before. Like we had the McAfee case, for example, that there are cases where you can totally screw the machines, but in general, I think at least for the major apps, I would argue you're way better off just getting the stream from the vendor as fast as you humanly can, because the time from, I'm sure there's people that know more about this than I do, but the time from exploit releases or vulnerability releases to weaponized exploits is really dropping. It's like 24 hours in a lot of cases. And we can't get all that content tested on a variety of machines, package it up and push it out that quickly. And the only way we can do it is get it straight from the vendors and that speed.
Eric said that's fair, by the way.
Awesome.
Another question. I'll get you in a second. So Elliot wants to know, have you spoken to Jamp about your desire to move in an endpoint management as code direction? Did you see a telltale glimmer in their eye?
No, maybe I should.
And he has another question to follow up. How do you gather data you find interesting, e.g. self-service clicks per user metric?
Well, here's one of the advantages of being the manager. I usually say, hey, Clifton, or hey, Riff, there's this thing. You got a minute? And they're both like, and so that's the one advantage, maybe possibly the only advantage of being a manager is doing that. But seriously, both the win for having any configuration management inventory, of which both Casper and BigFix are excellent examples, is you can run these reports. And so I don't know if that's answering the question, but just digging it out of the, if the data is there, we can generally dig it out. Sometimes it's more complicated than others. But the problem is, I think the big limitation is it takes a lot of work if what you want is analysis that's not based on the current snapshot in time, which is what both systems are really good at gathering.
you may have answered this already regarding imaging, but being someone who's come from a company 3 times removed, using BigFix and Casper simultaneously, we used to always have the roundtable discussion of should we go with one or the other regarding Mac, because they do both Windows and Mac, and obviously BigFix, being IBM's product, has gotten better over the years and offers that single pane of glass. Do you still feel that Casper offers some functionality better than Casper? Obviously imaging being one of them from your vantage point, but anything beyond that?
Yeah, Casper's way nice. I mean, look, like they focus on one vendor and they're really good at focusing on that vendor. I mean, in the same way, like BigFix is just better on Windows. It's really good at supporting Windows. And so, yeah, I mean, you can definitely manage your Macs with BigFix, but I mean, imaging is not, is probably going to go away anyway, but just sometimes it can take IBM a while to get the agents to work. It's generally okay on Mac OS, but you know, for other enterprise software, you know, with any, you've probably all dealt this, with any big vendor, Jamf being a really hyper notable exception, if you get the update in 90 days for this, you know, one vendor supporting the other side, 90 days is good. And one of the biggest things I think that's a selling point for Jamf, I mean, they're not kidding when they say they have 0-day support. And actually it's much better than that. Usually they have beta support well before that. And that's actually a big deal because it means by the time the thing is released, assuming we have time, which we don't always, we can have tested it even before it released rather than 90 days later. And so, yeah, I would say there's a win for Casper.
Just a quick comment to follow on to that last question. It is telling that if you watch the past couple of years of IBM announcements, that IBM for the Mac at IBM project chose Jamf instead of their own product.
Good point, fair. I think former Jamf guy.
Walmart guy now.
So in regards to the Walmart guy, thanks, Miles. A little birdie told me, I can't say his name because he's from Jamf, but the patch management feature that's coming is actually a Tivoli Lite, maybe. I don't know.
Is what late?
Tivoli Lite, which is part of BigFix.
Tivoli was just like a big brand.
Yeah, but it was purchased by IBM.
Oh, sure. Oh, no, okay. Yes, now I know.
Now you see where I'm going with that?
Huh.
Yes, Rich, they did say Tivoli. I don't know.
I follow to letting the vendors do your patch management for like browsers and things like that, right? And at that large of a scale, 15,000 devices, and you've got to roll something back. Recently, Google with 58 acquired SAMs for all SSL certificates. That really hit us hard because all the neckbeards that I worked, their SSL was like bare minimum. So we had to redo all of our SSL certs for every single internal service. And it took a long time because there's no time because there's your printer jam as well. So in a situation like that, are you following like Chromium and all these other things to figure out what's coming to know ahead of time if it's okay, or are you just letting it happen and then you roll back 15,000 devices?
Riff here often makes fun of me. I have a pretty itchy RSS trigger finger. So yes, I sometimes refers to me as a web scraper, but I spend a lot of time, as other people do on the team, tracking updates. But you know, we have a reasonably good distributed sensor network, aka users, who will sometimes let us know. Sometimes they're like, this has been broken for 3 months. But it really, I can only think of 1 or 2 times where we've had to roll things back. Usually we catch stuff in testing. We don't always. There was an interesting case with Chrome where we switched from 32-bit to 64-bit, and we tripped a bug where if you had Flash installed and Flash wasn't converted anyway, you could read about it in the bug report. But there are cases, and that took a while to figure out and was really a fun postmortem. But we're able, I mean, if we can roll out 15,000 updates, we can roll back 15,000 updates. And again, I'm not saying it's not a problem. It's totally a problem. and you have to have institutional support for not getting your ass handed to you. But I think mostly we've managed to do a good enough job where nobody's filleted us when things go wrong periodically, and we've mostly been okay. And I mean, to that extent, I appreciate my management for that it just hasn't been a problem. And we're not perfect, but it's mostly been pretty good. I mean, in some ways, I think there's enough people that still remember how it used to be that when that goes away, I don't know what it will be like, but mostly it's been good enough where people are, especially going back to communication, if we say, hey, there's a problem when we're working on it, it's really been the cases that I think have gone poorly where there's been radio silence and then people start getting amped up. But at least on campus, one thing that's nice is, in general, excluding MATLAB not working, in general, if there's a problem, you announce it, people are generally pretty cool about it if you just own up to it right away and say you're working on it. I don't know if that's true everywhere else, but at Berkeley, that's a relatively nice thing. It's mostly other IT staff that will continually beat on you for causing a problem rather than the end users. Cultural differences.
Any other questions? Because this channel is
yeah.
Everything has a public IP because it's a public institution and you have to make the scientific data available to everyone?
No, it has more, and this is not that uncommon in higher ed institutions. We were not so early that we had any Class A addresses, but we have a couple of Class B addresses, and so roughly 64,000 each. Like, we got a lot of IPs. And so if you don't have a lot of IPs, you have to do a lot of management around it. But it's actually, in some ways, if you've been doing it for a very long time, and Berkeley was really pretty early on the internet, you just end up with big IP blocks, and it's been nobody's best interest to, like, who wants to take over managing that, handling some NAT internal routing. And then you know, we do have private IP space, but then you have endless proxy problems. And I'm not saying it's completely insane for us to have, you know, how there's this, you know, kind of the security joke, which is that hard candy outside and the soft and chewy center. Like, we don't have a border. There is no border. It's not like there's a campus firewall. There are machines and there is the internet, and it's a big, bad, mean world out there. And that's one reason I think we've been successful in roughly doing at least a reasonable job of securing the endpoints, because these things are, at least now, if you know it's on campus, it's not really any more secure than being in Starbucks. But now the great thing is, if you're in Starbucks, you're equally secure. And that's one of the reasons maybe it makes it more obvious why I think the Beyond Corp stuff is the future. I mean, we have host-based. I mean, there are firewalls, right? But you have to configure them yourself. There are hardware firewalls, and we do host-based firewalls on everything. So it's not that the machines don't have firewalls. In some cases, packets are traversing 6 firewalls because it's completely decentralized and lots of people set up firewalls. But oh, at Berkeley. Oh, sure. I mean, completely decentralized. You get to do whatever you want. You get to, Peter always used to tell me, customers have to be able to make their own choices, even if it's bad ones. We argued about that a lot. And like, at Berkeley, I can't tell you what to do. I can ask, I can plead, I can, you know, try and pull some string, but the people are like, I have no control. Almost nobody, if you are faculty, nobody can tell you what to do at all. And so if the faculty is running the lab, like, if you don't feel like it, you don't have to. Maybe Crypto Locker is our friend.
This is going south on us. All right, huge thanks to Ben.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ben, can you stop your share for a second?
Oop, sure.
Hey, I just want to say, while he's setting up, if you would like second dinner, the guys are still out there. and they look kind of sad and lonely, so you'd really be doing them a favor. And then if people are up for it, there is a brew pub 1 block that way. and first round is on us. So take a little walk and have some beer. But that will be after Jason gets logged in. He's dripping sweat onto his keyboard now. So. Did I mention we're hiring? No.
So special thanks to Peter and the Linde Group staff. Let's give them a round of applause. We are grateful to have them to host us here. So that was a great talk by Ben, and a huge thanks to Ben as well for this. So thank you. So FYI, we are still looking for hosts. We are still looking for speakers. We are trying to fill out the rest of this year. We are also trying to start into next year. So therefore, when we have these meetups, we can actually start to announce where we're going to be the following month, or maybe even just have a calendar set up for you guys for the full year, for you guys to be able to say, I want to go to this or I want to go to that. So please, 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 if you know somebody, if you yourself want to host, or better yet, if you want to speak and do awesome things like Ben just did, please, please, please fill that out. So we would love, let's do this again. It's to be determined. We do have a host lined up for next month. We're just trying to finalize some details with them just to ensure 100% that they are on board. If so, it will be in San Francisco. So we will be going back to the city. For those who didn't want to come out, shame on you. I will find you. I will see you in person. I know you. But to be determined. Otherwise, I want to say thank you guys for all coming. Thank you to Peter once again. Thank you to Ben. You guys are all wonderful. Thank you. Have a great evening.